All right, guys, thank you very much for joining us. I believe right now we are live on YouTube. Um, just to quickly introduce the panel and, of course, today's event. My name is Marshall Mehdi. I am the CEO and founder of Seek Management.co UK, an intellectual property and innovation platform. I'm joined today by Carole Croella from the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, and also by Samuel Sangwa from the CISAC, which is the Committee of Authors and Association of Music, and also by Wiseman from CEO at CAPASSO. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, hi.
Hello, hi.
Great, guys. So we are live on YouTube. Without further ado, we're going to jump into the subject. And I will just start, of course, by asking you guys to introduce yourself. If I may start with Carole, the lady first. So, Carole, tell us a little bit about your background and your work at the WIPO. And, of course, how does the WIPO interact with the creative industry, in particular those in Africa?
Thank you very much, Marshall, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you to Africa and Colors for this invitation, which I think comes at a timely moment. I represent here the copyright division of WIPO, which is the specialized agency of the United Nations in charge of promoting intellectual property worldwide. So both copyright, trademarks, patents, I mean, all the various components of intellectual property. WIPO has 193 member states, and these are our main constituents, the governments of our member states. And we actively work as well with a number of non-governmental organizations, around 250 NGOs accredited at WIPO, such as CISAC, for instance, who are very active partners in our work. So our work has different, I would say, components. First of all, WIPO is in charge of promoting the development of international legislation in the field of copyright, ensuring that member states adopt the proper legal framework in terms of copyright. So we work actively with governments at this, and we work actively also with the industry, with professionals to provide capacity building, create awareness in all matters relating to copyright and creative industry. The other component is also strengthening, I would say, the institutional framework in our member states, the infrastructure as such, in relation to, in particular, collective management. I'm sure we'll get back in the discussion to the important role of collective management to support the protection and the exercise of copyright. So WIPO works actively on all those aspects, legal framework, policy, capacity building, institutional infrastructure as such, in a nutshell.
Great stuff. And thank you very much, Carole, for the quick introduction. And of course, as you mentioned, we will have the opportunity throughout the conversation and to come back to the related management. So great. I'm just gonna pass the space to Samuel. Samuel, of course, you are based in Kigali, and you are, of course, a regional representative of the CISAC. Is that correct? Is that CISAC?
That's true. That's true. And good afternoon to everybody. And thanks a lot to African Color for extending this invitation to myself to attend this session. And as you said, I'm the Africa Regional Director of CISAC. And CISAC is the International Confederation of Societies of Author and Composers. So basically, this is the confederation bringing together copyright societies from all around the world. As of today, CISAC has 239 copyright societies which are members. And when we are talking about Africa, we have today 37 copyright societies which are spread over 32 African countries. And this goes from South Africa to Algeria, Senegal to Ivory Coast, Rwanda, to Ghana, and the like. And basically, as a confederation, our role is to strengthen the copyright management system. Basically, provide copyright societies with the capacity to deliver on behalf of their members. And just for this discussion, the main role of copyright societies is to collect royalties and distribute it to creators, to authors. So this is very, very important. So basically, we strengthen the copyright society role. We provide them with professional rules by which they need to abide to, so to ensure transparency in their operation and governance. We also work a lot in legislative and regulatory framework in countries where our members are established, basically working with government, with civil society, with artists, to make sure there is an enabling environment for protection and enforcement of copyright in those countries. We do also a lot of advocacy and training of artists across the continent. And last but not least, we also provide an information system which help societies to have their works, music, audiovisual, to be traceable. So we provide an identification system for musical works. Later on, we may be talking about the ISWC, which is a very, very important identifier which enable musical works to be identified, recognized, and enabling a remuneration of artists. So in a nutshell, that's CISAC.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Samuel, for that introduction on the great work that CISAC has been doing. CISAC has been doing on the ground in Africa, and of course, we see that is a very important work. And I believe that you guys are also collaborating with the WIPO, in that regard. So let me just quickly follow with Wiseman. And Wiseman, I will ask you, of course, to introduce yourself and to talk about, of course, your background and, of course, the work at CAPASSO. You need to unmute your microphone, Wiseman.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, thank you very much. So CAPASSO is, in essence, a collective management organization. Well, what we do in a nutshell is we monetize the use of intellectual property. By that, we really mean just musical works. Primarily, a big focus on what we do is in the digital space. So we license collectively with our other CMOs across the continent the use of musical works in the digital space. So we also license the use of that very same work on offline usages, like your broadcasts or the reproduction of any particular musical work in a form of a CD or a vinyl or a cassette tape in some instances. So in essence, that's the long and short of what we do. So we represent quite a few composers and publishers across the continent, either directly or through our bilaterals that we have in place with our sister CMOs across the continent. And what we do is really ensure that the African voice in the digital space is heard and understood, and the African writers are protected in a similar vein as their counterparts in Europe or Americas are. And a big chunk of what we do really is to ensure that through licenses, we are getting fair value for the exploitation of musical works or on digital platforms. And that's essentially what we do. And as for myself, I look after the operations of the organization. And just to clarify the name is Wiseman Ngubo. So I understand the click will be very difficult for a lot of the French speakers to pronounce, but it's all right.
Is that Tosa? I mean, the one with the click, if I'm not mistaken, yeah?
No, I'm Zulu.
Zulu.
Yeah.
like the later great Mandela, I believe.
Mandela was actually Kosa by trial. But yeah, it's the same in the sense that it's part of the Nguni lineage.
Okay, great stuff, great stuff. We're learning already about the cultural history of South Africa. Yeah, thanks to you, Wiseman. Fantastic. Thank you very much for the introduction. As you probably all are aware, the creative industry is a key sector in most modern countries. And of course, the idea is that through the work that all of you guys and all of the institutions are doing, we can really support the creative industry into growing. But something I would like to really start with is, of course, the challenges and how much has the industry kind of changed in the last decade. If we could start from there, in the last decade, and of course, how has the work of each of you or each of your industry and has evolved throughout that time. So if I start with Carol, and of course, Carol, I believe you've been with the WIPO for 20 years now.
Yeah, something like that.
So Carol, how much has the work that the WIPO is doing on the continent, how much has it changed over the last?
I cannot hear you anymore, but.
Sorry. So what have been the main challenges over the course of the last decade that you find in your line of work, and of course, trying to really implement those policies and not trying to drive the understanding and application of the intellectual property on the continent?
Well, thank you. I think we have two phases, if I can say so. We have the also coming just before the COVID, where really the digital marketplace, has really created a lot of opportunities for local content to thrive on the global markets. But in order to be, local content to thrive, to be monetized also on global markets, you really need a proper legal framework. And the evolution of technology, the evolution of business models has made all of this much more complex, which means that, the legislation needs to constantly adapt to those new business models, to those new forms of exploitation of content. And this has been a challenge. I told you before that WIPO has the responsibility to develop the international legal framework. And this is mainly through treaties, international treaties that create a level playing field for the production, the exchange of creative content on the global marketplace. And what the treaties do is that they create mutual recognition, and they establish minimum standards of protection, if you want, which makes it that all the member states play the same rules of the game. They benefit from the same rights, the same obligations. And normally the national legislation complies is based on the international treaties. So having those international treaties, having the national laws updated to the technological environment is definitely one of the key challenges. The second main challenge, of course, is updating the institutional and the infrastructure as such, because, of course, creators need to be fairly compensated for the use of their works, if you want them to continue to create. And the failure to properly reward creators is limiting revenues and future investments in culture. We said before that collective management organizations play an essential part to ensure that the copyright system functions effectively, that creators are properly monetized. But in many parts of the world, we still see that, for instance, this infrastructure is lacking. Collective management organizations are not properly functioning, and there is not you don't find the proper skills also for the CMOs to function effectively and to license the rights. The third area of challenge is, of course, compliance with the law, ensuring that the users pay for the content they use. And there you also have different levels of challenges from users such as traditional broadcasters also, who very often do not comply with the rights. We use create content to attract more audience. And the same applies also for the online platforms. You will see that in Europe, there has been a very important debate on the so-called value gap. The fact that big digital players use creative content, create a lot of economic revenues, but those revenues are not properly shared with those who create the content. So those are different levels of challenges, you know, today.
Great stuff. And I think coming back to the last point you just made in terms of the new laws and regulations that were passed throughout the European Union, I believe one of the big cases was YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, they're still trying to force their platform to share the revenue with some of the user, if I'm not mistaken. So do you think that's something is going to be a success in terms of course, maybe that particular regulation that was imposed in Europe will be translated to different region and different region will follow through?
You're asking me?
Yes, I am asking you.
Well, I think definitely these new provisions in the European directive are very important. We will have to see how they are effectively implemented in national legislation, because we know that European directives are not directly applicable into national legislation. So now it's up for the EU member states to implement that. But they are potentially very important provisions, yes. So we will see. I mean, you know, we currently have at WIPO, we have what we call the Standing Committee on Copyright and Related Rights, which develops about the development of international norms in the field of copyright. And currently, our member states are discussing a major initiative on copyright in the digital environment. And we have commissioned a major study also on music in the digital environment. Unfortunately, because of COVID as well, our member states were not able to meet right now, but this is a discussion which will take place in the framework of the WIPO SCCR, and I'm sure the issues will be tackled by our member states.
Great stuff. Just jump quickly on you, Samuel. Based on what Carole just said, are you guys experiencing the same type of challenges on the ground, on the continent? Or do you think there's maybe some key sector that some key point that might be more relevant than, of course, the perspective from the perspective of the WIPO, which is a bit more international?
Yeah. Anyway, I want to stress that we work with WIPO, and definitely over the decade we've been engaging in addressing the very same challenges about legislation, about enforcement of legislation. But I want to take it also from another angle, which I may be calling "show me the money." Where is the money in this this industry? To give you some key figures to show the change into the IP discussion over the continent as far as copyright enforcement is related. So when I joined the organization, that was back in 2016, all copyright societies across the continent collected 69 million euro. That was back in 2016, 2017. And in 2017 and 2018, this jumped to 75 million euro. And the year following, we got to 78 million euro. So we've been seeing a steady increase of royalties collected on behalf of creators on the continent. And this is translating much more efficient copyright societies, legislation which have been putting in place. But what we need also to keep in mind is business model also has been changing a lot. Back in 2017, 2016, actually I'm going to talk about 2014, when we were talking about digital, the share of the digital revenue within the all collection, we're talking about something like 512 million euro globally, worldwide. And this represented 6% of the global collection of royalties worldwide. And in 2018, we jumped to 1 billion euro collected in terms of digital revenue. And now the share of digital revenue within the global collection is 17%. So you can see from 6% in 2014 to 17% in 2018. Basically, we are talking about threefold the thing. So what does it mean? It means the industry is changing radically. Radically, we are going more to the digital consumption of musical work, of audiovisual work. And this is now where we come with now challenges. How do we position copyright societies? How do we frame our legislative framework to be sure to capture those new business models? My colleague Wiseman will come back later on this, but this is now where the industry is going. So we've been working a lot on the ground, first of all, to support societies within that transition. We are really transiting. You may know that most of the broadcasters on the continent, and broadcaster, we are talking about radio and TV, we are almost completing a digital shift. We are leaving the analog, we are going to the digital. So this is the new. And this comes with new reality, with this kind of new implication. So where is the money going, to come back to this question? So the money is going towards digital exploitation of work. So how now copyright societies, we at CISAC and WIPO, how do we support societies to capture the economic value of the creativity within the digital space, and especially within the post-COVID, or the COVID, actually it's not even the post-COVID, we are still in the COVID.
It's in COVID indeed.
Where all of the exploitation, the consumption have shifted to the digital. So this is a new reality. And Carole said something quite important. Europe, the EU, has enacted a legislation, the EU Copyright Directive, which aim to enforce copyright within the digital, actually mostly about the big platform which need now to play by these rules. So what about the African continent? So I will leave it there to say this is now a challenge. What about the African continent, where we need to have legislation which will enable our creators to be remunerated when their works are exploited within the digital? And this is the challenge of the IP. And related to the following panel, where do we want to invest? So we can only invest where we are going to see enabling environment. I will not put my money in a country or in a continent where there's no legislative framework protecting my investment. And the investment today is within the digital.
Great stuff, fantastic. I think this is actually a point that I'm very keen to hear Wiseman opinion, because as a collective management society, how do you deal with all those challenges in order to really increase that revenue for the members? So if you just want to enlighten us on, of course, how you go about dealing with all those challenges, Wiseman, that'd be great.
Great, man. So one of the key things, and not to reiterate what my colleagues have already highlighted in terms of the challenges, but around implementing, I suppose, safeguards and working within the realm of what we do, is the key thing. One of the key things has been collaboration. That's where we found the most success, right? So banding together as CMOs across the continent has given us the ability to be able to speak with a collective voice, for one, when we are speaking to the CMOs, or when we are speaking to the DSP, sorry, and we're speaking to these potential licensees who are in conglomerates in their own right. It's important that we then come with a bouquet of rights that then allow them to be able to then see the continent and all the territories within the continent when we operate as an easy, thorough way. So instead of having to negotiate 54 different licenses across the continent and thereby using their power to strong arm the territories with either very little or no representation for songwriters at all, we then speak as one voice from all the CMOs, which then helps to standardize the DSP's entry into each of these territories, but more crucially, it standardizes everything around saying a songwriter in Algeria can earn at the same time as a songwriter in South Africa at the same rate. And what that does is it enables the ability to then distribute and pay out at a similar rate without perpetuating the idea of the ones in more developed territories earning more, and thus perpetuating that cyclical issue of forever chasing a carrot you can never get. Yeah, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Is that something that's actually possible? And for that point you just mentioned, if we're talking about, of course, having a standard that goes across the continent, whose job will be to implement such standard, and whose job will be to police to ensure that, and of course, these standards are followed throughout? And Samuel, would that be the job of the CISAC, or would that be the job of the repo to Carole?
Now, that would be the job of the CMOs first, because we'd be the ones implementing the licenses. So we, as the CMOs, in representing our members, first, as we speak with each other, we are standardizing processes amongst ourselves, such that we standardize things like notification. How do you bring the metadata for your song to any one of the CMOs? The standard in which that metadata is required in, say, Rwanda would be the same as the standard required in SA, which is essentially the same as the standard that would be required in, I don't know, England, France, or any other one of the other territories. That's the first part. And then once that is done, it's then us going into discussions with the potential licensees, standardizing the discussions. When they go into Europe, there's a European single market in Europe, which is not necessarily the same in our continent. So what we then do is, through collaboration, we sort of create a full single market where they can come into the territory through one door and are able to launch in multiple territories, thus making sure that the consumers in those markets who want to be able to access any of these new mediums or access content by any of these new mediums have the ability to do so. And at the same time, the creators of the content who actually require compensation for that content being exploited in these new mediums also have the ability to earn from those mediums in a very clear and standardized and solid way. And then we then come at a later stage to then cajole the likes of CISAC and the likes of WIPO to then say, let's try and then standardize our lobbying efforts across each of the territories to improve the process. So we're no longer starting from scratch at that point. We are now improving the standard of legislative protection by lobbying the likes of WIPO and lobbying the likes of CISAC to then lobby our individual governments.
So the idea that you are proposing, of course, is a bottom-up standardization rather than a top-down standardization. That will be the case of the WIPO in that case. Carole, what do you think about this particular idea? I would really like to get your view on that, of course, based on your.
Well, what I wish to say is that the international treaties, they create minimum rules for all the WIPO member states, 193 member states, when they ratify the relevant treaties. But those minimum rules are really important because they ensure a degree of mutuality among the countries that have signed the same treaties. Which means that works, a book, a movie, a sound recording, a performance is recognized the same way the other country as in the home country of the right holder. And that's very important because when you have international trade, of digital content. You cannot license, you cannot properly get your remuneration from outside if the other country has not ratified the treaty and does not provide for the same level of protection, for the same rights. So this is where, you know, the treaty, the international treaties create really that level playing field which is necessary for the monetization of content at the international level. And thereafter comes also what Wiseman said about, you know, the process and the tools and things like this. And what WIPO offers in that respect is that we do offer a state-of-the-art software, which is called WIPO Connect, to the small societies in emerging collective management organization that don't have the commercial ability to acquire the ICT equipment which is necessary to document, to license, the rights as such. So, you know, these are different levels, they are complementary levels, both the legal framework and then the tools when it comes to the management of the rights as such. We can't hear you.
So once again, we could really assume that, of course, it's important to have a change come from the bottom, as you mentioned, because, of course, once again, the treaty is just a guide that, you know, some countries may follow, some other countries might not follow. Samuel, as somebody that's on the ground, why will some countries choose to follow the treaties and other countries choose not to follow the treaty? What do you think is that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and then Carole will come later on. But I think there may be a lack of understanding of the potential of IP in some of the countries across the continent. It's really to understand how IP enables you to realize the potential of your creativity. And then we are talking, creativity is very, very vast, but if we break it down, we are talking about the music industry. We are talking about the audiovisual industry. We are talking about the visual industry. And behind those names, we are actually talking about employment. We are talking about jobs. So most of our countries, I would say, are still looking at economies based on agriculture, on commodities. So that's where you'll see a lot of budget, a lot of focus. But with the IP, what we've seen today, I think 30 years ago or 20 years ago, the IP was not as a key economic sector as of today, you know? So there is this transition which needs to happen in some countries where we are no more talking about commodity economies only, about agriculture value chain. We are actually talking about a knowledge-based economy. And a knowledge-based economy is about IP. And IP starts from these treaties. And to break it down, why is it important? Because treaties bring a level playing field which enables enforcement of rights within the country. Just to make it simple, and Wiseman talked about that. Let me take one of the latest developments within the digital space. You may have heard about this project, which is called To Africa project. This is a project by Facebook. They'll deploy a submarine cable long of 37,000 kilometers across Africa.
Around the continent, yes.
Yeah. So what is the entry point? The entry point that looking at this is a continent with a huge potential as a market. So as of today, out of the 1,300,000,000 inhabitants in Africa, only a quarter are connected to internet. But they can see, they can foresee, if we can increase the rate of connection to the internet, we are increasing the share of the market. We are increasing the market, you know, and this is the youngest population in the world. We are talking about 60% of the population, which is less of 25, and they are connected. But if you're talking about Facebook, you are talking about creative content being consumed on this platform. So at the end of the day, you need countries to understand we need legislative framework where a giant like Facebook and the like will play by the rule. So first of all, you need to have the rules in place. And you start with the treaty. And then you go to national legislation. And later on, how do we now bring in the operational side of this? And Wiseman can explain. When you have millions of data, for instance, from YouTube on Facebook, and then a small society in Rwanda or in Zanzibar needs to license. To license means to give Facebook the authorization to use a specific creative content. You know, you don't even know where is Facebook. You don't know where to write to them. How do you engage with Facebook? You know, so you need to have the operational capacity, the legislative framework, which enables you to engage. And this is the challenge of now. If you hear such kind of a project, it means we are talking about more creative content exploited online, more and more artists looking at this opportunity because it's an opportunity. You are reaching out a wider audience. We have seen that during the COVID where artists went streaming live because they saw an opportunity. So how do we ensure that countries understand? Definitely we need a commodity-based agriculture, but knowledge-based economy where IP is such a fundamental sector, we advocate for countries to adopt necessary treaty, to enforce the necessary legislation to make it happen, and to strengthen the operational capacities of societies on the ground. And Carole has explained why Connect is how do we capacitate operationally corporate societies on the ground to become much more efficient in this regard.
So, I mean, yes, I definitely do agree with you. However, based on my knowledge and understanding, as you mentioned, most countries in Africa, they kind of still focus on that basic industry, which is agricultural. How do we get, if you were to ask, for example, maybe the president of one of those countries, why don't you focus more on IP? It might be a question of either education or capacity in terms of having the resources needed to really invest into that sector. Do you think it is the domain of the public or it is the domain of the private sector to really come up with those solutions that can really implement? I will start with Wiseman based on his experience, then I will follow up with Carole. I would love to hear your answer on that one. If I can start with Wiseman, please.
Okay, so I think it's a dual process. I think it's government's role to create a conducive environment for investment and research and development and the creation of IP. And then it's the private sector's role to then go forth and create that IP and then monetize that IP. So there's always a dual symbiotic role, which is important. Without the necessary environment, you won't see a lot of research and development and money being plowed into the IP sector if the legislative framework within any one territory or one country is not conducive for that. In fact, the more the countries that are more, to use popular language, that are 4IR ready or do really well in the 4IR space are countries, as Samuel has alluded to, that invest a lot in the protection of IP. Because when you protect the IP, then you have a higher adoption of new media, a higher adoption of any new inventions and patents, because people are creating and because they're incentivized to create. They are now incentivized to try and figure out new ways and spend more money trying to figure out whatever new process there is that might eventually change the way we do things. So without a dual process where government does their role in terms of making sure legislation and the environment in any one territory is conducive, and the private sector making sure that they don't sit on the money, because you have a situation where if the private sector is spooked by the legislative environment, then they'll sit on the money or externalize the money. When they externalize the money, you don't see much more investment in that territory. They'll much rather go into other territories, plow the money in there, see investment in those territories. Whereas when you see really the creative sector, I think if I remember correctly, the multiplier, the economic multiplier of the creative sector, particularly in SA, was higher than that of agriculture, in the sense that for every rand or dollar that the government would have spent in the creative sector, they were making about 4 rands or $4 in economic activity at a later stage. So if you were a government and you were looking to be forward thinking, and I think the other problem really with our governments that they're too old. The median age of the continent, is what, 21, 23? Parliament, all our parliaments across the 54 territories are basically like 65-year-olds are the ones who are in those territories. So they're not as forward thinking as the youth are. So you have people who are not interacting with these new medias, trying to legislate for new media when they don't use them.
Great stuff, great stuff. Samuel, I'm going to come back to you. So in terms of the CISAC, what type of, and it's a question that will also probably be beneficial for you, Wiseman, to answer. What type of innovation have you guys seen that actually helped drive, the collection of royalties? Beyond the fact of simply organizing better collective management organization, what type of technological innovation have you guys seen that actually made a difference on the ground in terms of helping collect more revenue?
Yeah, I'll go by an example. One of the opportunity, I would refer to it as an opportunity which came within the collective management of copyright. Collective management, it means copyright, basically business, is the monitoring of music within the digital. So one of the challenges societies have been facing is how do you monitor the usage of music on radios and alike and TV? Because it's very, very important. One of the function of a corporate society is to identify, to trace where the music is played, how many times, and this will form part of the remuneration. So one specific company in Uganda, very young, saw that as an opportunity. It's called Feza, which means actually money in Swahili. And they came with a solution. I came in contact with them through another organization. They made a pitching, and basically they've developed a solution. And now they're selling this solution to the government and to the corporate society locally. So you can see the type of technology solution which are now coming up because there is an opportunity in that sector. We can talk about several business models which are now coming up. We are now having more and more digital content. Going example with my country, where we've seen one entrepreneur bringing a very innovative way of capturing the creative content. You may remember what we used to call Ngubo, or the photo roman. I will speak it in French, which means these magazine where you have pictures telling a story. Actually, you follow a romance like a story, and then
Yes,
so he has developed.
Yeah.
So he has developed an application where you are following a story, not like a movie, but a sequence of picture. So it's bringing together the nostalgia of this photo thing we used to have with today's consumption, which is digital. So he has a specific application. So he's taking all of the movies from the random young cinema repertoire, and he's turning them into this type of content where it's much more picture. So you can see the type of business model, the type of creativity which is coming within this scope. So I think this some of the point. And now why is IP so important is if this young person has invested time, money, you know, it's a kind of a startup, and then there's no protection. It means anybody can get this material and copy it, you know. So this is infringement of copyright. This young person cannot recoup his investment. There's no need for him to continue. So that's why we need the government to come in to say, look at the type of businesses which are coming in, and we need to provide the support to make sure we incentivize the people who are creating. They are sure they have exclusivity on the exploitation. Nobody's likely to just take it for free and then sell it and ride on it. So these are type of opportunities which are coming in.
Financing. Carol, how does I'm just going to ask you this one because I'm quite interested to find out, how does the WIPO actually finance, or does the WIPO finance at all financing when it comes to IP implementation? Does it support financially each member state, or how does that whole process go? Or each member state is, of course, in charge of their own financing when it comes to developing IP framework and IP infrastructure?
I didn't get the question. You're asking how WIPO finances its activities?
Does WIPO finance help countries or members countries finance the IP infrastructure at all, or provide any financial support?
Well, our budget is specifically dedicated activities as such. We do not give money to countries, but we do finance projects, activities of our member states linked to the various copyright areas, whether it's to facilitate the implementation of the legislative framework, whether it's to promote the development of new collective management organizations, CMOs. As I mentioned, we also provide free of charge this IT tool, which is called WIPO Connect, to facilitate the management of the rights. We support the development of copyright offices also in the country. So these are the kind of activities we do. I want to stress one thing also as a clarification to the earlier discussion on the treaties, why some countries maybe do not ratify treaties. Those treaties are negotiated by the member states. They are not something which the WIPO Secretariat adopts and then tells the member states, now you have to implement these treaties. All those treaties that we have in the field of copyright have been negotiated by the member states themselves. So they reflect the vision member states have copyright in the digital age. So I think that's very important to understand, and I can tell you that African countries are particularly active at the international level now. I could mention, for instance, in another category than music, in the field of visual arts, the African countries are actively promoting the adoption of the artist resale right, which is a specific right for the painters, for the visual artists, when their paintings are resold on secondary markets. So just to show you an example that this is, the countries are themselves negotiating and adopting those treaties. You also asked before also what are the tools that can facilitate I think the management of the rights. And I think one important issue also is to better educate creators, to better educate artists on the important role of digital identifiers. Samuel mentioned before the ISRWC for musical works. You know, those kind of digital identifiers, they are really important because they contain metadata on who are the owners of the rights, what are the uses which are allowed, etc. So it's very important that those digital identifiers are promoted, are used either in the musical sector, in the audiovisual sectors, another kind of identifier. And those will really enable authors, composers, authors to be remunerated in other countries when their works are being used. So this is the kind of tools that digital technology allows also to facilitate the licensing and the monetization of content.
Great stuff, great stuff. Because we're kind of running out of time, we got about 15 minutes. I have a few questions I would like to ask you guys. Jumping back to you, Wiseman, in terms of all the key points that were mentioned so far, in order to really improve the environment and also achieve more collection. We spoke about so far education, technology, and of course now financing. Coming in terms of education, for you, Wiseman, how do you actually, how does CAPASSO goes about educating the members, and of course, how do you guys actually support them to make sure that they really take advantage, they really protect all the IP, and how do you guys go about helping them finding, if you do so, any type of financing?
Oh, all right. So I'll start with the last one. So because we're a CMO, the most crucial element from a funding perspective is running distributions, because in that way you are not dependent on anyone. The IP is funding itself. So we ensure that we run distributions 4 times a year at the very least. And those are the distribution schedules. Within those 4 times, we're running multiple distributions each time of multiple services, so that the creators of the content do not necessarily need externalized funding, because we are also, it's basically a proof in concept. If we can give you the money that your IP has made, and you can take that money and reinvest it, it's a proof in concept of how IP is an economic activity in and of itself. So that's the most significant element that we try to do from a funding perspective, because the IP has made the money. If we can monetize it at the right way and pay out regularly and as efficiently as possible to our members, then our members can be self-sustaining. That's the principle behind that. And then from an educational perspective, anyone who wants to work in the IP space, particularly in the music industry across the continent, has to take up the role of sharing knowledge. For the longest of times, particularly the music industry was clouded in secrecy, lack of information sharing. And now, with the rise of a DIY musician, there's also an understanding that you need to capacitate the creator to understand more about what it is that they are doing. So we do that in a number of ways. One is we run very strong educative material on all our social platforms. So if you look at our social platforms, a key identifier, key signifier is a way of trying to explain exactly what it is that CAPASSO does and how we monetize the musical works. Because the more educated our member is, the easier our job is. The more they understand our internal processes, the more they see and peep into all our internal processes within the organization, the better they are at understanding how they can leverage whatever it is that we're doing for their own individual careers. And we also do that by doing a lot of workshops. We do quite a few virtual workshops now during COVID, hence us being even part of AIC now, because it fits well within the mandate of trying to disseminate the information as much as possible and as far and as wide as possible. So we do that, and then we collaborate with a lot of other conferences across the continent as well, who have engaged audiences who want to find out more. We make sure that we go out there, we share the material. So there's a lot of educational elements that we do around that. And as well as going into schools, that we do a few of those also lecture series, industry lecture series within the schools, the school environment, so that the people who are studying to be professionals within the environment get the information early, so that by the time they are professionals, they already know.
So, given the fact that we're probably all aware of this, especially Samuel probably be aware that I believe South Africa is the most successful country in Africa when it comes to collecting royalty for the citizen. Am I correct?
Yes, you are totally right. To go back again to where is the money and who's making money and where is the money being made, in 2019, actually, CISAC released its reports CISAC release each year a report which is called the Global Collection Report, which actually provide information about all royalties collected around the world and per specific country. So for 2019, 2018, basically Africa collected 78 million euro, and South Africa itself collected 39 million euro. It's really, really
the biggest chunk of the pie.
That's almost half of the share of Africa.
So how much has CAPASSO collected, Wiseman, out of that big chunk? Apparently, South Africa is taking the whole money. They're not sharing with the national president. So how much have you guys collected for your members? If that's something that you can share with us, of course.
I think we collected about 130, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the previous year. It should be
5 million euro.
What's the currency we're talking about, Wiseman? Sorry, if you can just be a bit more specific.
Oh, sorry. In euro terms, I actually don't know what the translation is because I can't do it in my head. So I was thinking more rand terms.
Rand, yes.
But I can provide for CAPASSO, and that was actually one of the most efficient society in terms of royalties collected. They went up to 5 million euro. And we are talking about a very specific aspect.
Minimal right, yeah.
Yeah, we are talking about mechanical right or digital right. You need to get the picture that in South Africa, you have 3 copyright societies. One is for performing rights, which is SAMRO, and then you have CAPASSO for mechanical right. This may be very technical, but we'll say CAPASSO deals with anytime there is reproduction of the work, and I'm talking under the authority of Wiseman in that regard. So South Africa was definitely the best, but it's also the economy. South Africa is the
second biggest economy after Nigeria, after all.
The biggest economy in Africa.
Second biggest, last time I checked.
But also there is a strong, I would say, business-oriented management of copyright societies. You know, it's really, really efficient in that sense. So it's really, really business-oriented in that regard. And then you have Algeria, which collected roughly 16 million euro, I would say. And then you have the last country among the top 3, which is Morocco. They've collected 5 million euro, I would say. And then you have the rest of the continent, countries like Ivory Coast coming to 4 million and the like, and a chunk of them which are between 500 and 1 million euro, depending on years and the like. So we may say South Africa is the big player, but it's also the size of its economy, but also the robust business mindset they have in conducting collective management of copyright.
And I think there's one additional element there, just to wrap up quickly, or in the sense that in the digital environment, the monetization is you monetizing the end user. So without end users paying subscription fee, in fact, in the COVID space, you've realized that the money, even from services like Spotify, the resilient element that has been able to withstand even COVID is not the free tier, but the subscription tier. So where the end user is paying a price to access the music is when you can then make sure that the ecosystem is sustained. So the crucial element now is in how we then get the end user across multiple territories in the continent to pay, to understand that they need to pay a certain fee before they can access the content. Because it's one thing to get them to be using content on these platforms, but if they're using the freemium tier, then we won't see as much money as we should. We'll then have a value gap discussion. Whereas if they're using the subscription or the paid tiers, that's the only way we can really see a lot of income coming in. And that's where it's incumbent upon the creators themselves to monetize their fans, to understand the benefit of getting onto these streaming platforms, subscribing and paying a nominal fee so that you can access the content. And in that way, we create a very self-sustaining industry.
Great stuff. Fantastic, fantastic. Then I have another question that's coming through here for you guys. And this probably will go back to Samuel, since you're the guy that seems to have all the numbers on the ground. So what would you say are one of the most successful stories that you've seen on the continent in terms, of course, of company truly and really implementing IP in order to get in a technological age? You mentioned FESA, if I'm not mistaken, earlier on before. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about the company, if that's okay with you?
That's okay with me, but this is a business which is run by an entrepreneur in Uganda. I will not disclose as much details as possible, but I would have wished him to be part of perhaps tomorrow, if this is possible with Africa in Color, for him to come and explain later on how he has developed this idea in monitoring. But I'll more talk about a success story, because this is also very, very important. Sometimes when we report, we may think that everything is gloomy. A success story is from Malawi, where we have seen the implementation of a very specific copyright management scheme, which is called remuneration for private copying. So basically, we are talking about a system where anytime we have devices which enable reproduction of creative works within the private setup, on all of these devices, a small amount of money is collected either from people importing those devices or people manufacturing those devices into the country. And this money goes to the Copyright Society, and this is distributed. So Malawi has actually introduced a legislation in 2018, and as of today, their collection have gone fivefold, I would say. You know, they really multiplied their collection. So this is really a success story, and it actually say what we've been putting. When you have the legislation in place, when government understand how it's important to enforce copyright, by putting in place the conducive environment, the right legal instrument, legislative framework, this can really have a multiplier effect.
Great stuff, great stuff. And I have another question here for Carole. And probably that's going to be the last question for you, Carole. So the question I have, Carole, some of the guys are asking me here, of course, the local IP offices. We have some of the regional IP offices, the ORP, and of course the ARIPO. How effective should people go through those offices, or should they go straight away to the WIPO? What's the best advice you can, of course, give to company, creative company? Should they first touch base with the local creative office, or should they just straight away, trying to reach out to the WIPO in terms of support?
Well, it depends very much on what the objective is. I mean, if it's for registering, I don't know, a patent or a trademark at regional level, then it would be OAP or ARIPO. But copyright does not require any formal registration to exist. That's a major difference. So it depends really. I mean, we cooperate very actively with both OAP, with ARIPO, with other economic communities, such as in West Africa, the UMOA. But it really depends on what the objective is. It's really difficult. We cooperate very actively, but when it comes to copyright specifically, there is no registration as such, neither at ARIPO, neither at OAP, neither at WIPO. I mean, copyright is independent of any formality.
Great stuff, great stuff. And I have another question here in terms of course, innovation driven by IP. And this is probably a question for all the panel, of course. How much do you think that the continent could change if people took IP more in serious? people or of course government entities involved and also private individual and company took IP more seriously. So I'll probably talk about, I will start with the guy in South Africa, Wiseman. How much more can we do to become more efficient, in terms of IP? Should we keep going? Where's the limits? Where would you like to see in a couple of years?
Yeah, well, the sky is the limit, honestly, because the more innovation we can get, we're in a lucky position in the sense that we are able to look at where other territories have gone before us in terms of early adoption of technology, and we have the ability to leapfrog. So because everybody's looking towards us, and especially when we speak about things like music, we're looking at cultural products, and no one can export better cultural products than us on the continent. But the idea is then we then need to be very certain of how those cultural products are interacted with by the outside world. The description of those cultural products needs to be coming from us rather than from the outside world. The rules for the interaction with those cultural products need to be set by us rather than anybody else. And I think the idea is, I think in SA, the creative industry employs about 1 million people. And this is in a situation where, or in a country where there's about 50% youth unemployment. By youth, I mean people under the age of 35. And in a continent where the median age is 21, you then see the potential of just how many young people can be employed by these creative industries, because the majority of the people, of those 1 million people employed in the creative industry in South Africa, are young people, fall within the young category, and fall within the category of people who are either self-employed or people who were rejected by the formal market and then found a way into the creative sector. So if we are really looking to say, how do we curb unemployment? How do we issues of youth despondency? The idea is think more towards the creative industry. Put more money, leverage money away from, or maybe not away, just make sure you support more the more funding of money, and even if it's foreign direct investment, leverage that it comes into the creative and cultural industries, so that one, the youth who are already active in that space, who are thinking around ways of interacting with technology in that space, can find a way to self-actualize. When they self-actualize, you'll find that they'll sustain themselves more, they'll make money for themselves, and the industries will go a long way into ensuring that the economic activity within the country is not on government hands. But the more the government is looking at traditional industries, the more benevolent government needs to be, and the more problematic it becomes. So the creative industry is the solution to our continental problems, really.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you. Creative industry as a solution to the employment on the continent. Samuel, do you think so too?
Yes, I do think so. I think it's quite important. We understand that for a continent like this one, definitely the opportunity is really, really huge. The resources are untapped, and I really like this kind of image. All the time when you go in supermarket and you see the type of product you'll find there, most of the products are imported. You know, we import a lot. But if there is one thing which we can really develop, is the creativity. This is something really, really we can export. This is something which can really make us big. The other point which is very important is perception. And I think this will be linked to the following panels. Perception is very key within the IP. That's why we need ecosystems which are trusted, where governments are playing their role, the private sector is coming in. And when you're talking about investment, perception becomes very, very key. We've been discussing offline about this initiative in Cape Verde called Copyright Friendly Label. is how do we create a perception whereby people understand that complying with copyright is value addition to their business. When a hotel or a restaurant pay for copyright, how this is translated in a brand value addition for that hotel. So we need also to think such kind of initiative to associate copyright compliance with business opportunity. And the perception is, if a city is abiding by copyright compliance, if the government is complying, the perception is this is a country where the value protection of culture. So from an investment perspective, for me, it looks much more interesting to go in such a country. So the perception becomes very, very key. And that's why we are really pushing this pilot phase in Cape Verde, because we want to learn how you correlate tourism, culture, and employment in a country, and at the center you have IP.
Great stuff, fantastic. So IP and of course copyright, of course, as tool to really support business development and also creativity and economic development. I think we all agreed on that. My last question, which I hope I can get an answer from each one of you, starting with Carole, is something that we've been working on at SIG Management. Just to recap what we do at SIG Management, we are a communal platform, and we support the creative and of course tech industry in terms of IP management and IP innovation development. So one of the feature that we're working on our platform is really helping a company get more financing using the IP as collateral. What do you guys think about the idea of using IP as collateral, which is something that's very used here in the financial market, as a tool to raise capital? Is an idea that you guys see working for the continent on the short and long-term future? I will start with you, Carole.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a very important idea, because copyright is not an abstract tool, you know. It's really a structural tool to finance creativity and to support investment in the creative sector. You know, it's the main tool to turn creativity into an economic asset. And that's why it's very important that governments provide also the enabling legal framework, enough resources for that sector to develop. I think this is a time where the African countries are also involved with the negotiation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. And it's the question also, it's also time to ask the question, what is the place of IP in the export priorities? You know, IP, content industry, just take like the gaming industry, the fashion industries, they have huge export potential for African countries. I didn't have time to mention this, but WIPO has done also extensive economic research on the economic importance of copyright-based industries, how they support wealth creation. And, you know, it shows that they really have a high potential. So copyright as such is an economic tool. So your idea of using IP and copyright support as an asset to support investment and financing is really interesting. And it's how the audiovisual industry works. You know, in a lot of countries, for instance, they have quite complicated pre-sales mechanisms, things like this. And this is done through the economic role of copyright. But you need to build a proper infrastructure. You need to create an enabling legal framework where the rights have an economic value. You know, in the audiovisual sector, you build the so-called chain of title. It's only once the producer has consolidated all the rights in his hands from the various contributors, the screenwriters, the film director, the actors, etc. When he has built this so-called chain of title, which has an economic value, then he's able to go to the financial institutions, to the bank, to get loans. And this clearly shows the economic value of copyright when it's properly supported by the right legal framework.
Great stuff. Samuel, What about you? What are your thoughts on the idea? IP as a collateral to raise funding and financing.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the way to go. And again, we are going back to the perception, which is very, very important. So basically, when you have collateral, we are talking about an asset which the bank will keep the person to whom, or the company to whom they have given the money default, you know, so they can realize the assets, you know, they can sell it. And so here in the traditional business, the traditional market, we are talking about a property, movable one, immovable one, a house, a car, a title deed, you know. So now we are thinking about something which is not tangible to turn it into a collateral. So the only way it can work is the trust in that intangible asset. And that's where perception becomes very important. And here I want to elaborate on specific point where if I'm not sure I'm going to recoup my money, get my money from the collateral, that collateral, I don't trust it. You'll bring your IP, I'll say, I don't want this. Why? Because the perception becomes very key. And that's where the ecosystem is very important. If in a country, broadcasters from the government are not complying with payment of royalties, I'm talking about TV and radio, public one, they are not paying royalties due to artists, then definitely if an artist comes with such a IP saying, look, I have this album I'm going to release, give me money, I'll pay you back. I'll just look at the figures and say, the government itself is not paying. Why should I trust that you will get back the money? You see? So perception becomes very key. We are really talking about an ecosystem which we need to strengthen so that it becomes a trustworthy system. Sometimes they make a very bad case of bankers. No, these people work on profits. They will not take any risk. So when the IP is perceived as a risk, they will not go there. So how do we strengthen the whole ecosystem to make sure that the collateral is a trustworthy one? Is to make sure all the players give value to IP.
Great stuff. Wiseman, can I get your opinion on the question as well? You told the question before we jump to the last few one.
All right. So I think for me, the long and short of it is IP is a great investment tool, and it's a great collateral tool. And there's multiple examples for this. One is Hypnosis Songs Fund. It's listed in the London Stock Exchange. You can just take a look at it. But it's one of the first companies to become part of the London Stock Exchange top 250 index, and it's purely based on songs. And in the COVID element has actually proven that the share price for Hypnosis Song has basically proven resilient throughout the pandemic and the lockdown period, whereas competitors in the same space were not paying dividends or paying lesser dividends than they did the previous year. Hypnosis, the fund, was paying out stronger dividends than they ever had. And in fact, as I said, they climbed into the top 250 index in the shortest space, which was 20 months. So, and it's purely based on just songs and songs catalog and nothing else. And again, the Warner IPO launch being Warner launched the biggest IPO in New York this year, showing again the resilience of just IP as collateral. You can invest in it, and it's people are always going to consume music. And we're seeing people spend money. I think one of the rules is that right now catalogs are changing hands with about 13. The average is around 13 times the revenue. That's how much people are paying into to buy catalog right now. 13 times the annual turnover, which is showcasing a strong reliance and a strong trust in the resilience of the portfolio or music as an asset class. So it's an easy thing that we, as particularly as the African continent, where we have a strong cultural connection to music and a strong cultural connection to this asset class, that we can really work with. We're seeing a lot more investment coming into the continent. I don't know how many deals we've seen.
Yep.
We've seen the Share deal. We've seen Africori being funded by Warner. All of this. We've seen Chocolate City, the same thing. All of this is happening during COVID. When
The
other
market is
industries,
booming. There's market is
yeah,
booming. People are forced to stay at home and, of course, to consume digital content, and, of course, music.
yeah.
That's great, guys. We're going to wrap it up. Last few
Can I
questions
add
here.
something, Marshall?
Of course you can, Carol. Please go ahead.
I think your whole idea will work the day the creative community, whether it's the audiovisual sector, the music sector, understand they have to develop also proper contracts and build that business on proper contracts.
Exactly. This one is actually the feature that we provide on our platform. So let's just jump here on the quick question, last one. Surprise question. And what opportunity are your respective businesses and association and of course institution providing right now to creative in the continent? So what opportunity, I'll start with you, Carol. What opportunity is the WIPO providing to creative, or is willing to provide to creative on the continent?
A whole range. Just tell us. We're just looking for
That's a surprise question of the day.
more interaction, and you know, we are fully flexible. I mean, from distance learning, I didn't have the time to mention, we have a wide range of distance learning opportunities, capacity building. So I think times will be difficult also with the creative community. You know, the COVID impact is quite hard also for the creative sector. So we really have to think, you know, on how copyright can be used in an innovative way and as a structural tool to further finance creativity and to properly remunerate the creators in this phase. But,
Great stuff. Thank you very much.
Let's interact, and we look forward to further interaction.
Great. Samuel, something
Yes.
special that you guys have for the creative on the continent? Special offer?
Yes, it's very important. Just to say, we have developed an advocacy exercise within the African Committee of CISAC, which is the Africa Copyright and Collective Management Day, which happens each September. And we'll be organizing it also this year. But what we have in mind is the African Union last year and beginning of this year has stated that 2021 will be the year of celebrating African culture and heritage. So we really want to bring all of you to advocate that beyond culture and heritage, we also put copyright at the heart of this celebration. And this is so important because the industry has been impacted so drastically by the COVID. So if we want to celebrate Africa culture and heritage next year, we need to bring copyright at the heart of this discussion. So we hope as we'll be making this advocacy exercise on September 14th this year.
All right, kind of lost.
Yeah.
So Wiseman, quickly, Job, I would like your answer to the question: what particular opportunity and offer do you guys have right now for creative on the continent? Something that you can make the most of.
Yeah. So the first one for us is there's as you would know, we're constantly licensing usage of of music across the continent, and the biggest one is right now we have been calling with our counterparts for all creatives to notify their metadata. We need that metadata needs to be in so that you can monetize your songs or the usage of your songs on platforms across different places, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Boomplay, Music Time, Apple Music, or YouTube Music itself, or any other really DSP element in there. if they're using your music, send the metadata to either your local CMO and make sure that they're claiming for that, or send it directly to us if you are a member of CAPASSO directly, or send it to your publisher if you are published. Make sure all your metadata is up to date so that you can get whatever minimal remuneration you should be getting for that usage.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys. All right, guys, I think we're out of time, and I would like to thank you very much for taking part, of course, to join us in this conversation. Carole, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much from Geneva. I hope it's not too late. I mean, it should be, what time is it right now? 6 p.m.?
6 time, same time.
Same time. Great stuff. So once again, Samuel, thank you. Samuel's back for data and all the details, information we provide about, of course, the continent. And once again, Wiseman, I'm really happy to learn a bit more from CAPASSO. Of course, as you mentioned, of course, people can get in touch with you guys in terms of sending the metadata and collecting more fees. Guys, thank you very much. We appreciate the time, and of course, we look forward to continuing this conversation on a more private stage. And of course, we will get in touch and of course keep talking about the industry and how to improve the collection of royalty on the continent. So thank you again for taking part today.
Okay, sure thing, man. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.